Story 1. I vividly remember being in preschool and not wanting to sleep during nap time, so my 2 female teachers let me stay up one day. While every other kid was asleep, though, one of my teachers came up to me and asked if I wanted to see their dog. They called it something along the lines of Herbie, I think. I thought it was a weird question and said, "The schoolhouse is too small. There's not a dog here." To which she responded, "Oh no, Herbie's in the back room over there. Come on, let's go see him." I remember her being really insistent about it, but I liked dogs, so what the hell, you know? So I let her lead me into the back room, and this is when my memory starts to go hazy. But I remember, instead of coming in with me, she closed the door after I entered. It was like some kind of boiler room, dark with dim orange lighting. And I remember backing up into a wall because, well, there really was a dog inside. It was a huge, rabid-looking thing with a black coat, and it was chained up to something, and it started barking and lunging at me. But, see, the chain kept it back. Every now and then, when I got tired and sat down, I would rush towards the door and slam it open, try to jiggle the knob, and generally was just shitting my pants and crying the entire time. But it wouldn't budge. And then, finally, the teacher let me out. I'd been in there so long the rest of the kids were up and it was nearly time to go home. But I remember the 2 teachers looking at me all concerned and asking me what was wrong. I pointed at the door and cried out, "The dog!" The one who locked me in there in the first place said, "You mean Herbie?" She then proceeded to open the door and pulled out a giant orange dog plushie that I hadn't seen before. The rabid dog thing that I'd seen inside there was nowhere in sight. To this day, I have no idea what actually happened in there, and I've never told anybody. But I've convinced myself that I might have just thought it up. Story 2. Sorry in advance. English is not my mother tongue. Be me. Hanging out with childhood friends, a girl and a boy, in the calm local woods back when we were about 17. Take my camera with me to take pictures of the clear night sky and the comfy fire, etc. We arrive during the day and set up our tents, secure the fire, etc. Sun begins to set. We still don't have enough wood. I stay at the campsite and prepare food while the friends are collecting wood nearby. Female friend comes back without any wood. She's giving me a weird stare. She looks at our camera, takes it, and goes away. Shrug it off. She can be odd sometimes. 20 minutes later, friends return, both with enough wood for the fire. Male friend starts making the fire. Female friend turns to me and gives me the camera back. "I found it in the brushwood," she says. "But you came and took it from me earlier." Laugh it off. She raises an eyebrow and guy friend mentions, "What are you talking about? She's been with me the entire time." I check their faces to see if they're pulling my leg. They look concerned. Guy friends suggest to check the camera. Go through pictures. Blurred, random pictures of trees and the ground. One picture shows my friends far away on the edge. Meanwhile, girlfriend starts to panic. My hair stood on end. Pictures are getting clear more and more. friend jumps and starts crying when she sees the next pictures. The pictures are of her, looking at the camera with a death stare and fake smile, and then emotionless faces. She takes the camera and throws it in the fire. We leave. She's been in therapy for years now. The male friend and I are also considering getting it. Story 3. Not my story, but this is something a Native American guy posted here a while back. It's some of the creepiest shit I've ever read. My dad picked me up from school in his pickup truck after he got off work one winter's night. We were driving on a long stretch of road that goes through the woods. It was pitch black outside. The truck radio didn't work, so I was just sitting and staring straight out at the road, getting hypnotized by the passing trees. Suddenly started to get an intense sensation that something was watching me through my window on the right. I started to turn my head to see what it was when my dad yelled, "Don't look!" Immediately start to hear tapping on the window right next to my face. Heart stops. Only time I ever saw fear on my dad's face. He started to pray loudly in Navajo. Stare straight ahead. Heart pounding. Not daring to look out the window. Suddenly the truck dips as a weight falls into the bed. Whatever this thing is, it's in the back. Right behind my head. I start to hear tapping on the window behind me. My father makes me look at him as he continues to pray. Close my eyes tight and wish for it to be over. After a few seemingly endless minutes, the truck dips again, and the tapping stops. My father says, "Tomorrow we'll ask your grandfather to say a prayer so that the evil will forget our faces. Drive home and lie awake in bed all night. Father and I never talk about it again." Story 4. Granddad told me about his great uncle before he passed a few years ago. Nothing really paranormal, but the idea kind of stuck with me. It reminds me of some of the things that pop into my head, but I'd already be committed if I were crazy, right? Well, anyways. Great uncle was a pharmacist. Granddad remembered meeting him a few times when he was really young. Parents began sending them to their rooms when he stopped by, only once or twice, but he heard them arguing. He died before Granddad turned 10. Went to the funeral and nothing really interesting happened, but it was closed casket. Years later, he asks his granddad about brother, great uncle. Doesn't want to talk about it. Fast forward a few years and his granddad is on his last legs. My granddad asks him again. Says, stop pestering the dead and let him go in peace. His granddad dies. My granddad asks his dad what happened. It's shortly after the wake, so he's in the mood to reminisce. Says his great-uncle helped support Granddad when he started his family. Great-uncle was a pretty normal guy, but he started getting weirder and more distant over the years. Went to visit him once, and his house was pretty much empty. But there was a makeshift shed that was boarded up behind it. He asked Great-uncle about it, and he dodged the question and started getting angry. They got into a fight, and they didn't see him for a while. The story went around kind of aimlessly after that, so I'll cut it short. When he died, people were asking around what was going on. It turns out, basically Great Uncle thought that people turned into demons after sundown and were trying to break into his house. The house was too big for one person, so he made that shed to sleep in right in, and boarded it up every night to protect himself. One day he wrote a note to his brother saying goodbye. The demons were seeping in through the cracks like sludge. And that day, he smashed the door open and ran outside, and then went missing. A couple days after that, his body was found in the woods, eaten by wild dogs, presumably, but abandoned. Hence the closed casket. This could have just been my granddad messing with me, but I don't know. Miss you, Granddad. Story 5. Be me, 23 years old. Reminiscing about when I was young with my parents. For some reason, we get onto the topic of creepy things that kids do. My mom informs me that I used to scare her a great deal as a kid. Used to claim I always saw ghosts all the time. Mom was a firm believer that as a young boy I had some sort of connection to the spirit world. She tells me she believes that because of all the weird shit that used to happen around me. Ask her what the weirdest event was. She tells me that one day after school, I was sitting in the kitchen talking to her about Harry Potter, and she was at the stove making spaghetti. As my mother put it, I suddenly stopped talking. She looked over at me, only to see me fade out of existence like TV static. I have no idea what that means, but that's exactly how my mom said it. Apparently, I just disappeared. I was gone for 5 minutes. My mother was frozen in fear, unable to even understand what she just saw. Soon, I returned, fading back into existence and continuing my story right where I left off, like nothing even happened. She asks me where I went and what just happened. I didn't know what she was talking about. I have no memory of this. I asked her why it took nearly 2 decades for her to tell me. She informed me that she was horrified of me when I was a kid, and that incidents like this used to happen constantly with me. To this day, I have no idea what my mom saw, and I have no explanation for what even happened. Story 6. Here's one that my father's told people every time somebody brings up demons or paranormal activity. Rural area in Maine. There's an old abandoned house a field away from a back road outside of town. Sometimes you can see it from the road, and sometimes it's not there at all. One night when my father was in his 20s, him and a couple of his friends went to explore the house and see if any of the rumors were true. Apparently, the house was supposedly cursed with black magic. The story goes that town officials held seances in the basement and sacrificed animals and people in an attempt to gain dark power and summon demons or something. It being invisible sometimes was also just a rumor. It's there, and it didn't seem magical from a distance. As my father and his 3 friends start walking up to the porch, my father suddenly is filled with a flight or fight response that unnerves him. Hey guys, what if there's like hobo junkies in there or some sort of animal? We gotta at least open the front door, man. Come on, don't be a pussy. One of my father's friends, Dan, is leading the 4 of them. As he creaks open the door, He winces in disgust. Ugh, it smells horrible in there. As they gather in the entry room, my father smells it too. It smells like a rotting corpse. Something he'd experienced in the woods when he was younger. Dead deer, that sort of thing. Dad's spidey senses are going nuts. Guys, we should just leave. This doesn't feel right. Will you relax, man? It's probably just a dead raccoon or something. My father sees what looks to be chicken wire all over the house at first glance. Looks like some critter used to live in the house, and the chicken wire kept it from going where the owner didn't want it to. But it's set up tall, like human height. One of the guys asks, "What the hell is up with this fencing shit?" The same dread that my father had been feeling up to that point suddenly hits the whole group. Something's rustling and moving upstairs. Dan says, "Okay, to hell with it. Let's go see what that is, and then we'll leave." The staircase is at the center of the building with walls on both sides. All anybody can see from there to the upstairs is some off-white wall with water stains on it. Dan starts going first. My father's in the last place at the bottom of the stairs. He looks towards the kitchen and notices that some of the chicken wire has long black hair on it. It's too long to be any animal that he's heard of. He looks back to the stairs as Dan's finally reaching the top. Dan, the courageous, tough guy, peeks to the left and stops dead in his tracks. He turns around, white as a ghost. He's hyperventilating and looks like he's starting to cry. We need to... Everybody starts running for their lives before he can even finish his sentence. My father's the first one out of the building as the others follow, and they can hear Dan shouting, "Run, get back to the car." As they pile in and leave in a panic, Dan's now crying like a baby. "What the hell did you see?" Now trying to choke back tears in a state of severe post-trauma distress, Dan starts trying to describe it. It was like a pig. A giant pig. What? He snaps a bit. But it was a guy. Walking like it was a person with hair and shit. He starts really sobbing and breaking down. Its eyes, man. It was like stealing my soul. It had no fucking eyes. He just keeps crying like a baby as everyone sits in bewilderment. And they never speak of it again. My father says that years later, Dan took his own life after a long downward spiral that started that day. Almost like it really did steal his soul. My dad can't sit through any media related to pigs or demons without feeling unnerved. Like how he described when he first walked up to the house. That "I have the body of a pig" video utterly terrifies him as well. He refuses to ever watch it again. This was in Somerset County, somewhere in the woods between Skowhegan, Madison, and Norridgewock. My dad refuses intentionally to tell anybody exactly where it is, out of fear that he might be sending someone to their death, whether it be through a demon or just people crazy enough to fake a demon. Route 201 in Skowhegan is a road sign facing east, advocating the local municipality that's just a straight-up inverted pentagram for a symbol, with wholesome pictures in each point. So, for all I know, the satanic cult theory might actually be true. I can't find any pictures of it online, but I'm sure you can find it in the road view in Google Maps. I've seen it with my own 2 eyes as well, and honestly, just thinking about it makes my stomach turn. The people in leadership in Somerset County are just psychotic and kind of like to stroke their own egos so much that I have half a mind to think that it actually is cursed with satanic magic. Everybody in Maine hates Skowhagen, and the surrounding area too. It's really screwed up in a way that can only be understood if you actually live there. Story 7. Be me in the early days of Tinder. Have a thing for goth scene emo girls, so swipe right on this super goth chick. She swipes right too, and we start messaging, and she invites me to come chill. Hyped about getting some, so I grab a condom and head to this chick's house. House is super small, cracked siding everywhere, and the carport has no roof. Thinking about saying F this when she opens the door and motions for me to come in. Decide what the hell. Get out of my car and follow her inside. Walking into the house, and it's like I'm transported back to 1982, with the only exception being the brand new TV. Probably stolen. Not a light in the house is on, but there are literally 100 candles lit in this tiny 3-room house. Weird, creepy little statues everywhere. The centerpiece was this massive upside-down crucifix, literally floor to ceiling, and it looked like it was created with railroad ties. Jesus was made of wrought iron and still had the lance of longinus in his side. Be Catholic, so I'm a bit unnerved by that. Thinking with the other head, though, so I just kind of brush it off. The room suddenly drops like 20 degrees, and her grandma comes in from the other room. Really frail little woman with big, thick-rimmed glasses, but you couldn't see her eyes at all, just dark, sunken-in voids. Figure she just came from the back door or something. I went to stand up and shake her hand, but before I could, she firmly insisted that I remain seated. She makes some basic small talk and tried to make her laugh so she'd be cool with me piping her granddaughter. I swear that her expression didn't even change once. And when she talked, it almost seemed like her mouth didn't match up. Sort of like a badly dubbed over cartoon. She cuts me off mid-sentence and says that she'll let us get to it. And then disappears back into the back room. I snuggle up to my date. The second I touched her, I got this weird, uneasy feeling and every hair on my neck stood up. I guess she noticed and took it as I was into her or something and started trying to shove her tongue down my throat. Anyway, I start plowing her on the couch. But something keeps moving and catching my eye on the other side of the room. I was kind of worried there was someone watching us or something in the corner. Didn't want to tip him off that I noticed he was there, so I try to be discreet about it until I'm sure. I roll my date over and notice her back for the first time. She has a massive, super detailed scarification tattoo of a skeletal ram's head on her back. There was a pentagram on its forehead, and it had weird symbols around it. She asks what's wrong, and thinking fast, I tell her the condom broke and that I've got another. I get up and start rummaging through my pants, quote-unquote, looking for the condom. The plan that I made up in my head was to act like I had to run out to the car and get one, but then just leave. At this point, I'm figuring that I'm going to have to fight a cracked-out pervert, so I flip the light switch by the door. Right as I do so, she screamed so loud that it made my ears ring. In the far darkest corner of the room, there was the shape of a man. It was at least 7 feet tall, and its limbs looked sharp and jagged, if that makes sense. I only saw it for a second because the light bulb blew up. With only my jeans in my hand, I grabbed for the doorknob when something hit me in the chest and knocked me down. The girl's on the couch still screaming her lungs out. I stagger up and lunge for the door to rip it open and fall through the screen door. I pick myself up, but I'm having a hard time breathing and my chest feels like it's on fire. I manage to get to my car ass naked with my jeans in my hand and realize that it's my metal scapular that's burning me. It felt like someone held a lighter on the metal till it was hot and stabbed it into my chest. I frantically dig my keys out of my jeans and jam them in the ignition and tear out of that hood. I said the prayer to St. Michael the whole way home. By the time I got back to my apartment, my metal was cold to the touch. I stayed up for 3 days straight, terrified in my apartment. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't attend my classes, and I don't even remember eating. All 3 days are really a blur to me, and it's really difficult to remember them, or even the ordeal at that woman's house. Story 8. Be me. Ask a friend if he knows anyone who had access to some tools I needed to finish a project. Friend tells me sure. Says he knows a guy from work that will be happy to help. Apparently he was interested in the same kind of art as me, but warns me that he's a bit off. Drive friend to work one day. He introduces me. Guy seems really distant and withdrawn. Shakes my hand and we chat a bit. He seems really interested in the woodwork I was doing, and we talked about sculptures and such for a little while. Things we'd learned, tools we'd used, that kind of thing. The guy starts warming up a bit, and I ask him if it'd be alright if I checked out some of his stuff. He hesitantly agrees, kind of like when you're trying to come up with an excuse, but just can't do it. He tells me to swing by later that night, and that we can chat over a few beers. Okay, sure. Later that night I get a call. It's the guy. He sounds a little shaken up, and tells me things are chaotic at home, and that right now isn't a good time. He tells me he'll call me sometime. Whatever, sure man. 2 weeks go by. Guy calls one afternoon. Says things have settled down, and he wants me to bring over some of my works as well, to compare and blah blah blah. Sure, dude. So I start to head over and notice this guy lives in the middle of nowhere. I actually had to call him up just to find his house. It's at the end of a long driveway. There's a beautiful acre of land, and the driveway's littered with trees. His house is actually really nice. As I come up the driveway, something strikes me as odd about the trees I'm passing, though. Upon closer inspection, they all have faces carved into them, facing the driveway. Twisted, pained faces. I didn't think much of it because I make morbid stuff myself, and in fact, I'll be honest, I was very impressed. But the amount of detail was staggering. Looking out into the tree line of the property, every single tree had pained faces looking in on the house. Almost like the woods were watching you, wherever you were. The effect actually kind of creeped me out. Looking out was like seeing 100 or so pale faces, and just crying out. Kind of like they wanted your attention. I knock on the door. The guy answers with a beer in hand, and a much friendlier demeanor than before. Helps me to carry some of my stuff in, and he shows me around. He seems pretty cool. Begin to notice that each room has one of those same faces hanging above the doorframe. And the more I saw them, the more, for some reason, I felt sick. Up close, the faces were a lot more detailed than I'd imagined. Almost surrealistic. I asked the guy what his focus on the faces were for, and he sort of tensed up and dodged my question. Upon entering his workshop, which, side note, was really sweet by the way, he seemed to have other interests besides creepy faces. There were entire 7-foot-tall sculptures of women, men, animals, all really well done. And there was one with a tarp over it in the back, just kind of chilling there. He says it isn't done yet, so I don't bug him about it. It was right in front of a door that I think led to another room. We began working on stuff together and trading stories and talking about times that we'd accidentally injured ourselves. Suddenly, in the middle of a conversation, the subject changes. The Guy asks me what I think about God. I tell him that I'm not very religious, but I don't want to rule anything out. Guy starts getting a bit loud, saying that God is a blatant lie and that he was told so. By who? He kind of went silent for a moment and then abruptly asked me if I believed in spirits. Gave him kind of the same answer. I don't know, it's possible, I guess. He starts looking around the room, as if looking to see if anyone was around. And then his voice goes super soft and he kind of whispers for a moment. I see things in the woods. At dusk I can see their shadows. Sometimes they whisper at me from the trees, and I can hear them. Obviously this guy is mentally disturbed. I egg him on, asking what they tell him. Apparently, they tell him that God is a lie, that the only thing after death is darkness, and he says that they laugh at him and leave dead animals by his tree line. Officially creeped out at this point. He said that for a while they would visit him at night, and each face carving represented a different spirit that had visited him. Says they can't stand looking at themselves in death, so they don't step within the tree line, and that's why he has the entire thing carved out. I'm pretty silent at this point. I hadn't had goosebumps so bad since I was a kid, and chills are running up my spine. He told me they talked to him from the tree line at night, and try to get him to come outside. I try to change the subject. The guy looks down and just keeps talking. He's pale as a sheet and was obviously genuinely terrified. He even kind of looks like he's about to cry. He tells me I'm the only person he's told, and knowing I'm a stranger, he apologizes and he says he's scared and doesn't know what to do anymore. I try my best to awkwardly console this stranger, and the guy actually kind of starts to break down. I think he needs help, but it's not my place to give it to him. I ask him why he's afraid. He says the faces don't work anymore. And 2 weeks ago, he'd seen something terrible in his living room. He walks over to the taped sculpture and pulls the tarp off, to reveal the most mangled, terrible thing I'd ever seen. It hardly resembled a human being. It was terrifying to have imagined this guy just seeing it standing in his living room. Shortly after he does this, there's a loud bang on the wall to my right. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but this guy didn't even flinch. And then again, bang! It just continued on and on, like hail hitting a tin roof. The guy screams, "Stop it!" And it ceases. After that, I grabbed my shit, told the guy that I was sorry, and got out of there as quickly as possible. As I'm leaving his home and driveway, I look into the rearview mirror. The tree line's darker than I've ever seen. Guy calls me a week later and apologizes. Says that he was silly and everything's okay now. Friend tells me later the guy quit his job. Never hear from him again. Story 9. This is a story about my grandmother's crazy, abusive stepmother. My grandma's a tiny 4'10" woman. Nicest person I know. Compassionate. Incredibly humble. Mom tells me that it's because she grew up with a literal wicked stepmother. Described her as evil. My mom grew up around her too. I asked Grandma about this one day. She tells me that her stepmother was really abusive. Apparently Grandma's dad traveled for work, and he'd be gone for weeks at a time. And during that time, her stepmother would put Grandma through hell. Grandma proceeds to tell me the following story. When she was a little girl, her stepmother told her that she had a severed head hidden away somewhere. The severed head could talk, and it told her stepmother secrets. Stepmom told Grandma that if Grandma ever lied or misbehaved, the head would rat her out. Naturally, Grandma grew up nervous about doing anything bad. Stepmom would ask her to do the most insane shit, and Grandma would just do it, no questions asked. One example she gave was that her stepmother asked her to walk 10 miles away to retrieve water from a creek in a little container. Stepmom laid down some rules. Grandma wasn't allowed to set the container of water down anywhere. She couldn't drink any of it, and she couldn't take any of her own water either. So basically, Grandma had to walk 10 miles in the blistering heat, and then 10 miles straight back, all without any water, and all without stopping to rest, or she'd technically be setting the water down. And she had to do all of this for a little bit of water, even though they had a water well out behind their house. Stepmom would always be waiting by the well for Grandma to get home. Sometimes she'd beat her, and sometimes she didn't. And this didn't matter how perfectly Grandma followed the instructions. But she could always tell when a beating was coming because Stepmom would be pacing by the well, looking agitated. She'd claim, "The head told me what you did," and then she'd beat the shit out of my grandmother for no reason. As she started getting a little bit older, Grandma started developing a spine, asserting herself a bit more. Stepmother responded by telling her the story about how she got the severed head. She told Grandma that it belonged to her ex-husband. Apparently, Stepmom slit his throat one night while he was sleeping. To avoid suspicion from her neighbors, she slashed her own arms and legs. She blamed her husband's death on a group of bandits. Told the police that the bandits had tortured them both. Stepmom showed Grandma the scars where she cut herself. Said that if Grandma didn't act right, she'd make another severed head out of her dad. And maybe one out of you, too. Grandma ran out of the house crying. Stepmom was laughing like a maniac as she ran off. Grandma ended up in the woods. She sat under a tree for a long time crying until she wore herself out and eventually fell asleep. When she woke up, it was after dark. She'd been there for hours. She got up and hurried home. As she's getting closer to the house, she's being quiet so as not to wake the stepmom. She's slowly approaching the water well behind the house when she hears two voices. She can't really make out what they're saying at first. She eases closer and can just barely make out stepmom standing by the water well. It sounds like she's talking to someone, but Grandma can't see anybody else there. There's definitely another voice, though, which Grandma said she didn't recognize. But her first thought was, she's talking to the head. In Grandma's mind, the head knows everything, and it's the main reason she's terrified of stepmom. So she panics at first, thinking the head knows she's there, eavesdropping, and then it's going to tell her stepmother. But apparently, that doesn't happen. So Grandma keeps listening. Stepmom keeps talking. The other voice answers. Stepmom's asking a bunch of weird questions that don't make much sense. The voice speaks really slow and sounds deep. Grandma's suddenly curious about what it looks like. She tries to get closer. But all she can see is the well and stepmom's silhouette in the dark. And then the other voice says, clearly,
"Someone is listening."
Grandma freezes. Stepmom's silhouette ducks quickly down behind the well. It pops back up and looks around, then hurries away towards the house and disappears inside. Grandma stays perfectly still for a long time. She's worried that her stepmother might be secretly watching her from the house. But she's also thinking that it looks like she put something down on the ground before she left. She thinks she left the head behind. After a long while of standing still, Grandma slowly begins approaching the well, crawling along the ground and trying not to be seen. She reaches the well and her hands feel a strange patch of grass. She feels around more. It's a pile of dead grass and leaves. It's covering something. Grandma feels around some more. There's a small handle underneath. She tugs at it. A door lifts up. It's a secret compartment in the soil. Down in the ground, about 2 feet deep, is a wooden box. Grandma thinks this is what she keeps the head in. She's almost afraid to touch it, but she lifts it out of the ground. It's very heavy. Grandma places it on the ground next to her. She actually whispers, "Hello," thinking it might answer. But nothing happens. She wants to look inside, but can't bring herself to. She decides she's going to get rid of the evil thing. She's still worried that her stepmother might be watching, so she crawls on her hands, keeping to the shadows. She lugs the heavy box behind her as she goes until she's a good distance away from the house. She remembers a huge empty tree trunk that she passed in the woods earlier and decides that'd be a good place to dump the thing. She hurries into the woods as fast as she can, carrying this heavy box, and dumps it into the hollow tree trunk. Then she slowly makes her way back home. When she gets there, her stepmother is wide awake, sitting at the table. She asks Grandma where she's been. Grandma tells the truth. "I fell asleep in the woods." Usually Stepmom either flies into a rage or threatens to ask the severed head if she's lying. But instead, she just orders Grandma to go to bed. The next night, Grandma sneaks out of the house. She returns to the tree trunk where she stashed the box and retrieves it, setting it on fire. She makes sure it's totally burnt before she heads back the next morning. Her stepmother can't get out of bed. Grandma checks on her and finds that her face looks warped. She said it looked sideways, like her mouth was entirely on one side of her face. After that, Stepmom was always very frail. The severe beatings pretty much stopped. Grandma was never sure if there really was a severed head inside the box. She never found any bones when she burned it. "But I know what I heard at the well," she said. And she wasn't alone out there.